sit down, let me go ahead and read some scripture for you. Paul says in Romans 12, it's a pretty familiar verse for us. He says, "Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will know God's plans for you." You guys can go and have a seat. Today's topic is it's an exciting one. It's a very personal one for me. And, it really kind of comes this time of year where a new year often brings hope, brings optimism, it brings joy, it brings this idea of just looking to the future and knowing that change may be on the way, that the past can be the past. And the start of a new year kind of does that for some of us. I know it certainly does it for me. I love this time of year. I am a person who just loves just change and being different. To me, different means new, and new means fun. When we always do things the same way, that's boring. That's the way we've always done it. I know some of you love that. That's fine. We can still be friends. But for right now, man, doing things the same way over and over, I don't know, that's just boring to me. Consistency is kind of sometimes boring to me. We'll get into that a little later, but this time of year just makes me think of that. But 2 years ago, almost to the day, that wasn't how I was feeling. It would have been January of 2018, about 6-8 months before. My wife and I decided to resign from the church that we were at and found ourselves in this really strange and awkward transition. And for me, while I can say this far more clearly now, I couldn't say it clearly then. But I was just lacking purpose. I was lacking focus. I was lacking this reason to live. And it took its toll on me. It was really tough. 2 years ago, I was not excited for a new year. I was not excited for anything. I was in a job that I really did not like, and that was such a struggle for me. Where I once had livelihood and life, now there was nothing. In fact, I hated going to church. I dreaded it every Sunday morning. But on this particular Sunday, I got up with my wife and 3 kids, and we went to church unrelated to this one here. And it was a place where I would go, and normally I don't want to be a face in the crowd, but at this stage of my life, because I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't have anything good to say. So I went to this church wanting to just be a face in the crowd. And you guys know how it is. When you go to church, there's often 2 types of people you run into. And I didn't want to run into either of them. The one are the people who are genuinely happy, joyful, hopeful, and their smiles were just driving me nuts. Like, don't come anywhere near me. I don't want that. I want it, but I'm so far from it. Like, stay away. I don't want your genuine smile anywhere near me. And so going to church was hard because sometimes you run into some really peaceful, joyful, hopeful people. Stay away. And then there's sometimes a second group of people, and they feel the same way as you. Well, they felt the same way as me 2 years ago, except they just faked it. I don't want your fake smile anywhere near me either. You know what? Life sucks right now. Just admit it. All right? We don't have to put on this little face and walk into church oh, everything is great. I don't believe in that kind of church. So hey, FYI, if you're going through a tough time, it's okay. You can go through a tough time here. If you don't feel like smiling, then don't smile. It's okay. I'm not gonna, just because I'm not where I was 2 years ago, and I'm full of a little bit more, enthusiasm right now, doesn't mean we all have to fake it. So that's okay. Just a little side note, that one's for free. So I go to church, and the other thing that was really challenging was, in the back of my mind, there's like this future that I still wanted. It's just that the hope for that future had been taken away. And so often, whatever the message might be, or whatever the preacher or whatever was talking about, it would lead me to like these feelings of, or thoughts of, something that I felt that I couldn't grasp and that I couldn't get. So I'd often walk away really frustrated because he did his job. Like, that's what we're supposed to do when we stand up here. But sometimes that doesn't match reality for us. And that's where I was at. And so as we were leaving the parking lot, it's my wife and 3 kids, and the job I was at that I didn't like, I had to work on Sundays. So we're leaving, and I'm not wanting to go to work at all. I hate the fact that I have to work on Sundays. Ironically, I still work on Sundays. In fact, I put in way more hours on Sundays now. But it's incredibly different, so this isn't work. This is fun. That was work. I hated it. I didn't want to go. And all of this is just in the back of my mind. And I can't emphasize enough how much I was struggling. How hard it really was. So Jen and I end up in that conversation. You all know the conversation well. Where do you want to eat? I don't know. Where do you want to eat? I don't know. Where do you want to eat? And somewhere in the midst of this really short conversation, we are maybe 2 blocks from the church. Something in me just snapped. I don't know what. I don't fully know why. Something just snapped. And I just screamed at her at the top of my lungs. It didn't last super long. I don't know how long. It's almost, I didn't really black out, but it's almost like a blackout. Like I just, something snapped. I lost it. And unfortunately, when moments like this happen in our lives, it's always the people that we love the most who get the other end of it, right? I scared all my kids. I scared my wife. I didn't even bother with the food conversation anymore. I was so scared. But before I could even realize how scared I was, not only did I scream at the top of my lungs, but I don't normally react physically either. But I did, not towards anyone, but you all know how it goes. Like, there's 2 things in life that always tell a story. Tattoos and scars. Walk up to anyone who has a tattoo and ask them what it's all about. Mr. Fox, tell me all about your tattoo. Most of the time, there's a story behind it. Whether it's a story of I was stupid, the story of this means something to me, the story of I regret it, or the story of just something else. But there's the story that comes with tattoos. There's also a story that comes with scars. And on this day, I created one of those scars. It's just this tiny little white scar right there on my knuckle. And it came from me punching the steering wheel because I had lost it. And there was just this little metal clip and kind of this lip on the steering wheel that apparently just got to my knuckle. And I was so furious. Rather than even bothering with eating, I just turned and I drove us home. And we were in silence, and my wife didn't even know what to do or say. She didn't know how to help. She didn't know. I couldn't believe that I had reacted in the way that I had over something so incredibly stupid. I finally looked down and saw that my hand was basically covered in blood, and I ran to my bedroom. I basically locked the door. And I didn't leave that bed for pretty much 3 days. And I sobbed, and I sobbed, and I sobbed as I completely hit this rock bottom moment in my life. I stand here today, 2 years later, full of hope and optimism. But 2 years ago, I didn't. Finally, my wife came into the room, and this was about a day later, and we started to have just this conversation. While I was still kind of out of it, I at least knew there was something in me that could at least talk about this a little bit more. And we had some pretty serious and frank conversations. The question of, do I need like, what happened here? How do we find out? Do I need to see some doctors, some psychiatrists? Like, do we need to, like, what do we need to do here? And I ended up calling in sick to work that Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Like, I didn't go anywhere, and I shouldn't have called in because I called in plenty already. And we came to some conclusion of some next steps for me. One of those was we just decided to start with our family doctor and start the conversation there to see what he recommended or who he might recommend or whatever. So him and I ended up having a very frank conversation. But my wife and I also talked about how can we prevent this from happening. And so this other longer process in me started because I needed to bring health back into my life. So one of the things I did is I sought out some people to talk to. And the truth is, I didn't want to talk to anyone I knew. Like, for me, there's just something about telling someone who's known me for a long time, like all my problems, like it was easier to talk to a complete stranger. And so there's this man named Dirk. And I didn't know him well. Like, we had shook hands a couple times. But some other people in my life who I really cared about talked about how influential he was for them. So I got his number and I called him up and we started to meet once a week for probably 4 or 6 months, something like that. And I bore it all. And Dirk had been through this stuff before and helped people in similar situations, and he just had the right questions. And I always said that I wasn't going to lie, and I was just going to tell all the truth no matter what. And here's what I came to realize through this journey that started 2 years ago. Is that there was a voice in my head that never would stop talking. And the voice might be similar to a voice some of you have. And it's a voice filled with negativity and criticism and harshness. And it was a voice that was my voice. How many of you know we are often our own worst critic, right? I had to change that voice. Not only to have a voice that was no longer critical, not just have thoughts that would go away, but I need to change those thoughts, change the voice. I want it to be the voice of the Holy Spirit in me, not something else. See, for much of my life, I have dealt with some different things, one of those being identity. I've never had a good idea of knowing just who I am. Or, you sit in the interview, right? And they ask you, so often ask you these two questions, which really aren't great questions anyway. I always know they're an amateur interview if they ask you. But anyway, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? I'm a guy, I'll give you 30 weaknesses before I can ever give a strength. Because it's hard for me just to say, yeah, this is something I'm good at. Because I'm always comparing myself to someone else. And, well, they do it so much better than me. Or they're maybe okay, maybe I'm average, okay, whatever. But these people, I had to start to change that. And see myself the way that God saw me. And so this morning, as we look at this idea of a new year, and some of us are all about, resolutions or changing what we do, changing behavior, taking behavior away, whatever different change or new we might be looking at. I propose that it's not about what you do. It's about how you think. Behaviors don't matter nearly as much as our thoughts do. What you think about matters. Your inner dialogue matters. And your thoughts matter more than you could ever possibly imagine. There's one thing you can take away from today. I hope it's this one simple truth. Your life will follow your strongest thoughts. Your life will follow your strongest thoughts. The Bible actually has a lot to say about our thoughts. And I didn't even recognize it nearly as much until I started just to even look and to study this just a little bit further. Paul also says in Romans, not only does he talk about letting God transform us into a new person by changing the way we think, but he also says in chapter 8 of Romans, he says, those who are dominated by their sinful nature think about sinful things. Do me a favor, I'm not going to replace what I say, but instead of sinful nature, even think negative thoughts or critical thoughts. Because here's the deal. Even our own voice in our head, when it thinks negatively or critically of ourselves, that is a sinful thought. Because that is not how God sees you. Jesus created you for a reason and a purpose. He gifted you and he created you exactly as you are on purpose. So when we think negative thoughts even to ourselves, it is sinful because it's a negative thought against our Creator. Those who are dominated by their sinful nature think about sinful things. But those who are controlled by the Holy Spirit think about things that please the Spirit. So letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to death. But letting the Spirit control your mind leads to life and peace. What you think and believe matters. These unhealthy, ungodly, unproductive thoughts keep us from being who Jesus created us to be. And until you change the way you think, you can never change the way you behave, because your life will always follow your strongest thoughts. What this morning is all about, and what this time here together is all about, is taking back and reclaiming our thoughts so that we can be who Jesus created us to be. Paul also writes in 2 Corinthians, he says, we are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We don't wage war with knives and guns and tanks and bombs. We wage war differently. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. So what exactly is a stronghold that we read about here? What does stronghold mean? Stronghold means a fortified military place of strength. A place that is heavily fortified. So as we're talking about spiritual warfare, as we're talking about these different types of weapons, there are these spiritual strongholds in our life. The enemy fights by deceiving our mind. Paul says, stronghold of human reasoning. It is a mind deceived. The enemy fights by deceiving our minds. So much so, it can be so powerful. And this is a silly example, but this is exactly what strongholds in our life can look like. My 4-year-old son Ruben loves to play hide and seek. Loves it. Run up, Daddy, can we play hide and seek? Now, the thing is, he's terrible at it. He doesn't even understand the game. To him, hide and seek is, I'm just going to hide. Not only you find me, like I want you to find me. So he tells me where he's going to hide. Hey, Dad, I'm going to go hide in the kitchen, okay? Count to 20. Sure, bud. And it's the only time it's not like for the day, when Reuben stops talking. Reuben is my mini-me. He talks all the time. So sorry, Mom and Dad, for the grief and decades that I've given you. I'm definitely getting back what I've sown. Poor Jen, she didn't sow anything. She gets to reap it too. So he'll go and hide, and I will count to 20 as slowly as I possibly can, because at least he's quiet. So finally I'll get to 20, and he can't hold it. Like, he can't wait anymore. Dad, I'm in here! Dad, I'm in here! Well, one of his favorite hiding spots is like this, like, pleather ottoman footrest thing that flips up, and you can store stuff in it, right? Well, it's the perfect size for my kids. All of them fit in it just right. So he'll often just go in there. Sometimes he'll even take like an iPod or something, take it in there with him so he can wait and watch whatever. It's his favorite spot. I already know he's there. So what I'll often do is just go over, if it's right here, I'll go over, plop down and sit on it. Reuben, I can't find you. Where are you? And he'll start to say, I'm in here. Where? I don't see you anywhere. And then he'll start to kick, right? And he'll start to try and push up. Daddy, I'm under you. What? Where are you? I can't find you anywhere. Reuben, I don't know. And so one time I decided to play this out for a while. And he's pushing and kicking, and he's kind of starting to freak out. He's like, Daddy, get off. I'm under you. Daddy, And I just stay there, plain dumb, for, what to him probably felt like 4 hours. It was really probably about 3 seconds. So I get up and I just kind of go elsewhere. He starts yelling, Dad, I'm in here. But at this point, he thinks I'm still sitting on top of him. He stops trying to push the thing up. I'm not there. I'm not on top of it. He is completely free. But he doesn't know it because he stopped trying. It's a stronghold of reasoning. It is a mind deceived, and often that's what the enemy does to us. The stronghold is so strong in our life that we don't even let ourselves get there because, we tried that before and it didn't work. Or, we did this or this or this. And sometimes it's there for decades. Christ has already freed us, but we aren't taking a hold of how we've been freed. And here's how Paul wraps this up in verse 5. He says, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. So how do we break strongholds? We capture it and teach it. We force it. We tell it to obey Christ. When it comes to our thoughts and the strongholds in our life, we capture it and tell it to obey Christ. Because the one who lives in us is greater than the one who lives in the world. Victory has already been had. We just have to grab it and break that stronghold. And it all starts right here. Because our life will follow our strongest thoughts. So what is it in your life? What are the negative, critical thoughts that you have? What are the things that are dominating what you do? Is it someone else's voice? Something that someone said, like, no, you can't ever be successful there. Have you seen your family? Do you know where you come from? No, you can't do that. Who do you think you are? Is it something to do with even body image? Where someone, when you were growing up, shamed you or told you that you weren't pretty enough or skinny enough or whatever. One of the thoughts I got and my friend did not mean it like this, but it's one of those thoughts that you just hold on to for 20 years. When I was in high school, I was skinny as a rail. And I started to work out with my buddy, and we've been working out for, a couple weeks, maybe even a couple months. And this friend, different friend, third friend, he was like, I just remember in a conversation like, Matt, you're working out? Like, I can't ever imagine you being, and I don't remember what the exact word is, and this is how this stuff goes, right? He probably just said, I can't ever imagine you being like crazy, super like Arnold Schwarzenegger buff, which is a true statement. Like, that's not my body type. But in my mind, I didn't know what word he actually said. And I often replace it with fit, or healthy, or look good. And it becomes this voice that someone else spoke that I twist in my mind and I never let go of it. Maybe for you it's, you didn't do well in school. How could you ever possibly grasp this concept or whatever it might be? Why should you have hope? The rest of us can't. Maybe you're worried all the time and this anxiety just eats away at you. Maybe it's depression. Maybe it's lacking confidence, or maybe it's just simple inconsistency in your life or lack of discipline in your life. Maybe it's even your time with God and you're like, I have tried so many times to follow that Bible plan or just to simply pray for 2 minutes a day. I just can't do it. And I've tried and I've tried and I've tried. And so often we stop trying. Or you can't get it done. Or I'm not a good enough mom. I'm not a good enough dad. I'll never get ahead. I'm always going to struggle. There's no way I could ever be free. What are the negative thoughts in your mind? Because here's what we're going to do. We're going to capture those thoughts. And to capture that thought, the first thing you have to do is to know what the thoughts are. What is it in your life that is holding you back? On all of your seats, there's this little handout. And this is kind of the culmination of everywhere where we're going today. On the back, or maybe you don't even use this card, maybe you want to go home and do this differently, but what I'm proposing is work. This is not easy. This is not a Sunday morning, yay, like, oh, my thoughts are so much better now. Like, no. To fight this battle takes work and effort. And it starts by writing down those negative thoughts in our mind. It starts by taking these thoughts that we have and this stuff, confronting it by writing it down. What is it in your life that's holding you back? What are those negative thoughts? And then what we're going to do is we're going to change those thoughts by writing down what God says. So if it's a thought that says that I'm worried all the time and I'm struggling with anxiety, no. Because of Christ, I am not anxious about anything. I cast my cares on God because He cares for me. I have the peace of God dwelling in my heart, ruling my mind. Or maybe you don't know God's will. No. It's not about not knowing God's will. It's this. My life belongs to God. Daily I seek Him, and He daily directs my steps. I know His voice, and He leads me to His perfect will. And some of you might say right away, like, no, but that's not true. Truth is truth, whether you believe it or not. What this is about is changing the narrative and the dialogue in your own mind. And it starts by speaking truth, because you're listening to lies all day long, over and over and over and over and over. We have to capture those thoughts and teach them to obey Christ by changing the dialogue. Maybe it's something about lacking confidence. No. My confidence is in Christ and Christ alone. Because His Spirit lives within me, and I can do everything He calls me to do. It's an exercise. You can call it several different things. It's a faith statement. We're calling it words to live by. What are the words that you are going to live by? I shared some of my story. There's other things in my life I struggle with. I too struggle with being consistent and disciplined. I can do great for a month, and then after that, it's the same thing. So I get bored and I look for something new. It's just that simple. I struggle with my identity. I struggle with prioritizing my time and putting the important stuff over the urgent stuff. I struggle with that critical and doubting thought and voice in my mind. I struggle often with insecurity, not thinking that I'm enough and that I can't get it done. Whatever it may be. A little less than 2 years ago, I started this process in my life. And I took time, and it took me weeks to really kind of nail it down and get this to where I need to be. And it still changes from time to time. In fact, just going through this, I took a couple of other statements out and I threw a couple of other ones in because of different changes in my life. But this is essentially a prayer that I have prayed almost every day for the last 2 years. And it has changed how I think, it has changed how I act, and my life has drastically changed because of it. So what I propose is that you write down your own words to live by. And change the narrative, change the dialogue, change the thoughts, because your life will go in the direction of your strongest thoughts. Here are mine, just as an example for you. Don't steal mine. By the way, I can make this available to you. If you just need something to kind of look at and get started with, it's not a problem at all. There's also some other resources that I found that are really fantastic that I would be happy to direct you to with all kinds, like hundreds of example statements. Here's mine. First thing I do every day is I read this list as my prayer for the day. I will end my day more like Christ than when I started. I will pursue, listen, and follow God today. My family deserves my absolute best each and every day. My family is always a blessing, never an interruption. I will prepare myself today for whatever tomorrow may bring. I will prepare myself mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally. I will focus on what I have, not on what I lack. I have more than enough because Christ lives in me. Today I will strive to become more like the person I want to follow because God has chosen to use me for his purposes. I'm not called to be a leader. I'm called to be a spiritual leader. My call is not to build a church. My call is to build the kingdom of God. I will always build up, never cut down. Believing in the best in others brings out the best in others. There is power in weakness. I will share my wounds, hurts, vulnerabilities, and insecurities with others, not just because others need it, but because I need it. I will win the battle today. Character is built and broken in the small moments nobody ever sees. And lastly, I will focus on people and culture more than goals and accomplishments. These are my words to live by. And I'll tell you what, I'm not perfect. There's days I forget to go through it. And there's days that while I might say this or pray in the morning, something will contradict in the day. But what I do know is that my life will follow my strongest thoughts. And the more that I repeat it, and the more that I say this, and the more that I pray it, the more I remember it in the moments I need to remember it. Where I say, no, that's not who I am. I don't have to be that. I can and do have victory. It's about changing that dialogue in our mind. How will you change your thoughts in this new month, new year, new decade? What are the things that are taking over your life? What is your voice saying? Just a few moments, I'll go ahead and close this out in prayer. And Brandon's going to play a song for us that we can sing along. And whether it's hope or sadness or contemplating what we're going through, give it to God. You don't even have to sing. You can sit and think. You can write. There's pens on all of your chairs. If you don't have one, just let us know. Write down some thoughts. But take your time and do this. It will change your life. I'm not saying it's always going to change like mine did. But what I know is that when we capture our thoughts, things change. This all happened to me 2 years ago in January. I started this process, probably that March, by May, things had changed so quickly and so drastically that I knew, even in probably June or July, that this was going to happen. But it wouldn't have happened, and I wouldn't have been ready if I hadn't captured my thoughts and changed them. Because your life will go in the direction of your strongest thoughts. God, pray for all of us in this room, that you would help us to change the dialogue in our own minds, that we can, in you, take back those thoughts, take back those voices, and that the voice that we would hear in our mind would be your voice, because you have created us for a reason. The past does not have to hold on to us forever. We do not have to be deceived anymore. We can be new, we can be different, we can be changed through your power.